at least for a few seconds in the beginning there. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me today, and I'm excited to talk to you about opportunities in the offshore wind industry. Um, Perfect. I see my presentation. Awesome. And if you can just go to the next slide. Little feedback there, but awesome. Thank you. So there's just a picture of me, but this is a good opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself. So I am the development operations manager at Vineyard Wind. I work on permitting, stakeholder engagement, and a variety of other development matters. I started just over 2 years ago, working actually as an intern for the company, and since then have grown quite a bit and progressed into my career in renewable energy. My background is in math and physics, is my undergraduate college degree from UMass Dartmouth. So I am a Acushnet and New Bedford native. So I went to New Bedford High School and I'm very familiar with the area. I've lived here my entire life. So I'm super excited to see these opportunities coming to the place where I live and I know and love. So hopefully you all feel the same way and see this as a huge opportunity that's coming in this direction. So I'm going to give you a crash course in offshore wind, but no worries, there's no tests involved. It's really just to give you a flavor of what offshore wind development looks like and what career opportunities you might find in the different phases of offshore wind development. So before I talk about offshore wind, I think it would be good to just tell you about the owners of our company. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So we are owned, maybe one more. Perfect. So we're owned by two major companies. So the first is Avangrid Renewables. They're the third largest renewable energy company in the United States. And our other partner, other parent company is Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. They are one of the most experienced offshore wind developers in the world, and they're currently developing projects in 4 continents. So North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So these two companies bring together a wealth of knowledge in financing, development, construction, operation of these projects, of all renewable energy projects. And we're bringing this knowledge to our local area. So we can go to the next slide, please. So Vineyard Wind, we acquired 2 lease areas. So you'll see the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket in the map here. And the yellow areas that are denoted in the map are lease areas 501 and lease area 522. So those areas are both operated by Vineyard Wind. There's a competitive auction process that we actually went through to acquire those areas. And within those areas, those were designed specifically for offshore wind renewable energy development. So that's particularly turbines. Wind turbines are the main, our primary wind energy, renewable energy generation source. So we have 2 projects that are under development that we're currently working on. Both of them are within the 501 lease area. So that's sort of the long, skinny one here in the middle. So both of our projects are in this area. So the first project will be at the top, and then the second project will be just underneath it. We can go to the next slide. And so both of those projects are working their way through permitting. But before we got to a place where Vineyard Wind had lease areas, there's a very long process that was that occurred over many years to incorporate lots of public feedback from many different stakeholders and allow the public to provide comments. So in the top image there was the original area that they were looking at to identify as the wind energy area, or the WEA. So the wind energy area was slated to, or they were looking at a huge area, and that area was pared down to the one below it, which is a much smaller area. It was reduced over 50% to the area that we know today as the Rhode Island and Massachusetts wind energy area. And that area was reduced to take into consideration feedback from lots of different stakeholders, including commercial fishermen, shipping, and North Atlantic right whale concerns. So that public process really helped inform the best place to put these lease areas to develop wind turbines. Next slide, please. So this process that I'm showing you here there's a lot, represents many years worth of time that it takes to develop offshore renewable energy projects. It starts with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or short for BOEM. They start the process of identifying areas where these wind turbines could potentially go. And then through public comment, like I mentioned earlier, they reduce those areas to a smaller subset that's acceptable to most stakeholders to build offshore wind renewable energy projects. Then they move into the auction phase. So if you kind of look on the bottom here, we see the auction phase. That's when we actually acquired a lease. And then once we acquire a lease, there's about up to 5 years of site assessments and surveys that need to take place before we can submit one of the major permitting documents that basically describes how we are going to construct and operate our offshore wind farm. So it's called the COP, or the Construction and Operations Plan. That details our exact methods for installing all of the components and connecting the generation back to shore. So once we submit a COP, it undergoes environmental and technical reviews through the federal agencies. And that process could take a couple years, up to a couple years, or maybe even a few years if you're the first offshore wind project like we are. And we're nearing the final stage of our first project, where BOEM will issue their approval, or approval with conditions of our construction and operations plan. And once they approve your construction and operation plan, you go through one more final design and installation report, and then you can actually begin installing your offshore wind renewable energy project. So it's a very long process to get these projects permitted, and I'll discuss those a little bit longer, but there's lots of opportunities for expertise or career paths within the various stages of this process. So I'll get to that a little bit later, but I think it's just important to note. On to the next slide. So what does the permitting process look like for an offshore wind project? Don't worry, there's no quizzes on this, I promise. You'll see that lots of these boxes are green or blue, which means that that permit has either been, the process has begun, or it's been completed. So you'll see we have most of our state permits complete, with the exception of some smaller road opening permits, which will get closer to the start of construction. And on the federal side, the main driver of that process is BOEM, or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And we recently, released a supplemental environmental impact statement, which is another key step in the process of getting to a record of decision or an approval of our construction and operations plan. So we are super excited about the Vineyard Wind 1 project progress. And if we click to the next slide, so I mentioned we have a second project that's under development. It's a very recent project. It has a lot of work to be done on the permitting side, but we are beginning to kick off those processes now. And so it's about a couple of years behind the development of the first project. So again, you might recognize some of those acronyms that you see under the federal tab there. So maybe, for example, USCG, anyone know that? Coast Guard, US Coast Guard. They're concerned with navigation and marking and lighting of the turbine, so we consult with them and look for their expertise there. The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, so planes are concerned with having any objects that are tall offshore, so both the turbines themselves or the vessels that we need to install. So those are some reasons why we need to be coordinated with the FAA for our permits. And again, there's many smart people that are looking at our permits and our proposed approach to install and operate these wind projects. So we look forward to continuing to move these through the permitting process and working with all of the state and federal regulators to make sure we're doing it in a responsible way, which is essentially what the permitting process is designed for, is to ensure companies are building things in environmentally friendly ways, but they also help us develop these offshore wind projects, which are super important. Moving on to the next slide, please. So career opportunities and initiatives. So as I mentioned, it takes many years to develop offshore wind projects. So I think it's helpful to talk about the career opportunities and sort of the segments of the project when in sort of order. So in the initial planning and development, there's lots of permitting work that needs to be done. So you saw all of those permitting agencies that we need to work with. So that's a huge piece. Community and educational outreach. So speaking with groups like you today and explaining how offshore wind works and how complicated and but also how it's necessary and can be done in the right way. So that's super important. Finance is important in all stages of project development. There's always going to be bills that need to be paid, and understanding finance is super important. Legal, so environmental law and policy is super important for developing offshore wind projects. Operations and logistics planning, so figuring out when you're buying wind turbines, it's a lot different than saying buying even a refrigerator, right? You can go and pick up a refrigerator, throw it in the back of a pickup truck and bring it back to your house, plug it in, you're good to go. You can't necessarily do that with a wind turbine or any of the major components of an offshore wind farm. So all of those logistics and how do you move this turbine from point A to point B in a safe manner are things that are being thought about. So super important. Scientific monitoring and survey work, I skipped over that, but it's a critical part. There's lots of different surveys that are taking place related to offshore wind. We're looking at birds and bats and marine mammals and fisheries, benthic habitat, and lots of other things that are sort of being indirectly surveyed in the offshore wind development process. So engineering, I won't even touch that. That just shows up everywhere. There's all different types. There's electrical engineering because we're talking about electrical systems. There's structural engineering because we're talking about putting things in the ocean and then staying there for 25 to 30 years. So there's lots of engineering to be done to make sure that they stay there for a long time. During the construction phase, I would say a big one that sticks out there is environmental health and safety monitoring. So making sure that our people are safe always is a huge priority for our company. So making sure whenever you're on a vessel, you're doing things appropriately. When you're transferring from a vessel to a turbine, you're following the correct protocol to make sure you have the optimal chance of remaining safe. So there's lots of training that's involved. Construction trades, so pile driving. So how do you get these wind turbines to stay up offshore? Well, you secure them to the seafloor pretty deeply. So you pile drive foundations into the seafloor. Construction and procurement manager. So there's lots of contracts with regards to buying product or components of an offshore wind farm. So that's super important. Construction manager, obviously very important to make sure things stay on schedule and we're complying with any rules that we may be obligated to. And engineering, again, just will always be there. And then the longest phase of offshore wind development is the operations and maintenance phase. So that's when the project has been constructed and installed and is producing electricity. And that could go on for 20 to 25 years. And during that time, things will need to be kept up and replaced and fixed as needed. So these are sort of some of the careers that you might see during that 25-year period. And one of the biggest one is O&M technician, so operations and maintenance technician. So folks going into the turbines, climbing those really tall structures, feeling confident enough to work in tight and closed spaces. And that's there's different levels of technician and there's different levels of training that are associated with those positions. And there's many different components within being a technician. So you could have a very specific specialization that you're qualified to fix. Helicopter and vessel operators. So there will be ships that will be offshore throughout the construction and operation of the facilities, and there'll be helicopter access to some of those structures. And I want to also note environmental health and safety is on there, but marine mammal observers. So that's a pretty interesting one. So marine mammal observers are folks that go on the vessels and they look out in all directions and observe for any type of marine mammals that they might see. And if they do see a protected marine mammal, such as a North Atlantic right whale, they would instruct the captain of the boat to reduce their speed to a limit that's safe to avoid that protected species. So lots of different careers in things very specific to renewable energy, but also things very broad like finance. So I think that it really depends what you're interested in, but these things will be brought to our backyard. I can say I'm a New Bedford native. We have a lot of folks that are on the Cape that are on our team. And now that we have our second project in Connecticut, we're also looking to expand our Connecticut team a bit as well. So lots of opportunities that'll be coming down the pipeline. I think the first step in really bringing a lot of these careers to fruition is the first project moving into the construction phase and out of the permitting development phase, which will hopefully happen early next year. So we look forward to that. And if we could just click on, I think we have one more slide I'll just touch on quickly here. So we're just one offshore wind developer, and these are just a few of the initiatives we have to train people in this area and bring the programs that they need to this area. So our company has a couple of different funds and initiatives that we've committed to bring these training programs to our area to get folks ready for the offshore wind industry. We also have a partnership with Vineyard Power, which is our community benefit partner based in Martha's Vineyard, and Citizens Energy to support community-based storage projects and address affordability challenge in low-income communities on Cape Cod, the islands, and South Coast. So I just wanted to touch on these super quick. No, not too many details available, but these are just a few of the pathways that we are sort of creating to bring the careers to the folks in our community. So we'll click to the next one, and I think it's just a picture maybe that I'll explain. There's one more. So that's me actually doing some recreational fishing on a charter around the Block Island wind turbines. I guess it was probably a year and a half ago now. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing more turbines out there hopefully in the coming years. So with that, I think I will stop and pass it back to Marianne or Trevor. I'm not sure who.
Yep, so you can take this down, Patricia, or you can leave it up. So everybody, does anybody have any questions for Tiffany while she's here? Thank you so much, Tiffany.
You're welcome.
Anybody?
And if you think of any questions afterwards, you can always feel free to email me. I guess one other thing that I would note if there's no questions is I would encourage everyone to consider taking an internship if possible. Internships are great opportunities to learn about what you might like about a certain field or company, or maybe what you don't like. So I would highly encourage you to pursue internships with companies. I think a lot of people are really interested in bringing on interns to help take on certain projects. And if you express interest, I'm sure that most companies have positions like that during the summer or others available. So just want to know that.
Did you see the question in the chat, Tiffany? Oh.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So different parts of the turbine are going to need to be maintained at different intervals. So depending on what component they're talking about, it could be, twice a year. It could be, there's lots of ranges in what is replaced. But ideally, the major components would not be replaced very often. So those are designed to last for a while, but the internal mechanical parts are mechanical parts, and they do have failures. So I couldn't give you an exact time frame on that. And you said I was an intern at Vineyard Wind. Did you always know you wanted to do this? I would say I had no idea that this is what I would be doing when I started college. in 2009. So I graduated in 2009 and I started right immediately following that. And I thought I was going to go learn about math and be a math teacher. And I took math courses. I did well. I then took a physics course. I learned about sort of environmental physics and how we can create energy from the resources that are around us, like solar and wind. And I think that really led me to my first internship when I was an undergraduate at a solar company. And I too there went from being an intern, and I sort of grew with the company as it expanded. And I really enjoyed working in the solar renewable energy field. So I had the opportunity to come into offshore wind as an intern as well. And I sort of looked at that as a very similar path to the solar opportunity that I had, because it's very much the same thing. We're creating electricity. We have to bring it back to your electrical meter and then put it back into the grid. We're doing the same thing with offshore wind. We're generating electricity offshore. We're bringing the power back to shore and we're plugging it back in. It's just a much different scale. So I would say I didn't know I would be doing this job ever, and I don't think I would want to do anything else, because it's such a fun experience. It's really the merger of math, physics, computer science, renewable energy. It's really, there's a lot of sort of opportunity, and it's not one thing that I work on all the time. It's a variety of different things. So I think that's really cool. It's a long you said it's a long process. How long does it take to be completed? So I think you're talking about the permitting process of offshore wind. And to give you some context, we submitted the permits for the first project in December of 2017. So here we are. So we're on the order of magnitude of years. So we're about almost 3 years later and we don't have our final permits yet. And I think that's a little bit of a special case because we are the first commercial scale project in federal waters. But it typically takes about 2 to 3 years to go through that process. So it's a long time, and there's a lot of there's over 20,000 pages of permitting documents that were created to just for the first project to explain exactly how we plan to construct and operate our wind farm. How much energy does a turbine supply? So there's different size turbines. So there's in our original COP, construction operations plan, we noted that we could use turbines between 8 and 10 megawatts. So in 2017, 8 and 10 megawatts were the sort of standard commercially available turbines. Now I think we're talking upwards of 14 megawatt turbines. So the turbine sizes have grown quite a bit. But just to give you some scale, it's 800 megawatts is equivalent to powering about 400,000 homes and businesses in Massachusetts. So that's our first project, 800 megawatts, 400,000 homes. And it's also equivalent to removing 325,000 cars off the road every year. So lots of energy to be produced there. And I think our first project is roughly about 6% of Massachusetts energy demand. So, there's lots of room for more offshore wind in our energy portfolio. And what's it like to be an intern in offshore wind? So I think that really depends what project you work on. So there's lots of different things that need to be researched in regards to what are the concerns of stakeholders in certain areas where you might want to bring a cable. What are the permitting processes that town needs to go through? And there's lots of different internships and projects that you might see as an intern. You might have something that's a little bit more database entry, so filling out contact form or contact information about folks. So I think that it's really difficult to explain what it's like to be an intern because it's really dependent on what projects are available. But I would say that there's always something new going on, and there's always something to research or to be investigating. So I think that it's a pretty unique spot to be right now because it's such a new industry. These are great questions, guys, too. So thank you so much for listening to me and for asking them. Appreciate it.
All right, anybody else? One last question. Are we going to let Tiffany go? Anybody? All right, well, I think that's it. If anybody has any more questions, I might have them forwarded to you just in case they are worried about anything or want to learn more about internships. And I think that
I put my email in my presentation, so you should all
Bob, are you able to unmute yourself? Oh.
Okay, yep, I think am I all set?
Yes, sir.
People hearing me, and can people see the presentation?
I wanted to just say welcome, Bob. It's so nice to have you with us.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure for me to be here.
And look at you with the shirt and tie. Don't you look spiffy today?
Yep.
And we have a swag bag and a t-shirt for you, but we thought you were coming. I know, I'm sorry about your mom, but I know that's a priority. So thank you. And
yeah, we gotta try and
yeah, and we know that, I don't know if everyone else here knows, we were planning on having the whole summit at Bristol Community College. So, you know, this has been an interesting experience for all of us to be virtual, but we're super happy you're with us. So thank you so much. And you know, this school, Global Learning Public Charter School, has a lot of dual enrollment with BCC, right?
Yep. I've done work with the Global Charter School in the past.
Yes.
I've made presentations there, so it's
great. Well, and I got their curriculum. I see the courses that they are collaborating. It doesn't look like the Blue Economy's on there, but maybe that will change after today. So I thank you again, Bob, for being here, and we look forward to it.
Okay, very good. I'm Bob Rack. I'm the coordinator of environmental science and technology at Bristol Community College. And I've been here for, this is my 23rd year that I've been teaching at Bristol Community College. And prior to that, you know, just don't always think that your career is going to be in a straight line. When I was in college, I planned on being a freshwater fisheries biologist. And that's what I was studying to be. And so while I was there, I had an opportunity to do a summer job at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in Woods Hole. And I applied for the position, and I went there and I got the position for the summer. And I was working as a biological aid at the aquarium. I don't know if people have been down to Woods Hole, but if you go past where the ships are to go to Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket and go all the way down the street, there's an aquarium down there. It's a free aquarium. It's put on by the National Marine Fisheries Service. And Woods Hole is quite a place. So if you get to go down there, it's worth the trip. You can't always see a lot of the stuff there, but it's the home of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, the Marine Biological Laboratory, the U.S. Geological Survey, and also the National Marine Fisheries Service. So on the East Coast, it's the largest area for marine science studies. There's also on the West Coast, you have Scripps Institute of Technology over there. And but on the East Coast, it's Woods Hole. And so I was working as a biological aid. So I was going out actually collecting things for the aquarium. I'd be going out in local waters on boats and things and collecting things. And I did that actually for 4 summers. I did it for 2 summers as an undergraduate and 2 summers as a graduate student when I was going for my master's degree in, and this was where I switched after working down in Woods Hole. I decided to go into marine biology. So I was working for my master's degree in marine biology in at UMass Dartmouth. And so after I finished my coursework, I was hired as a full-time temporary working there with the Resource Assessments Division. So my major area was looking at deep sea scallops. So I was studying all the ships that came in and out of New Bedford, collecting the catching scallops, what they got, where they caught it. And I also was going out on cruises up and down the Atlantic coast from Cape Hatteras up to the Bay of Fundy in Canada. And I did one study with about 10,000 scallops that I was doing a growth study on. And so I was all set, and this is another thing where things happen. I was all set to be hired full time, and the day I was going to be hired full time, President Ronald Reagan put a federal hiring freeze in place, and so I couldn't be hired. And so in the morning I was going to be hired, in the afternoon I no longer was going to be hired, and I pretty much could stay there for a little bit of time more, but then I had to find another job. And so, as I always feel, when one door closes, another door opens. And so I had been on a whale watch. One time I said, gee, sometime I'd like to do this as a job. And it just so happened when I was looking for a job that a position as a whale watch naturalist out of Plymouth opened, and I applied for the job and I was hired. So I did that for a year. I was going around to schools doing presentations. I gave 225 presentations that year in schools throughout Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and plus going out and observing the whales in the summertime. And then I thought it was time to look for a more stable type of position, because I was mostly working on commissions and things like that while I was out there. So I saw that they were working at the wastewater treatment plant in Fall River, and they were upgrading it. So I said, well, I'm going to go down there and see what's available. So this is, putting your best foot forward. I went down just cold. I walked in there in a 3-piece suit with my resume in hand. And when I walked in there, they said, oh, you must be here to see Bruce. And so I said, sure, I'll talk to Bruce. And it happened to be that they were looking for a chemist, junior chemist in the laboratory. And so I was hired with Metcalf and Eddy Engineering to work in the laboratory there. And I ended up shortly becoming the laboratory director down there. And I was laboratory director there for 11 and a half years. And so I worked about 6 years at National Marine Fisheries Service. Then I worked 11 and a half years at the wastewater treatment plant in Fall River. And then I took some time off to be with my family. I had 2 young boys, and my wife was teaching in Taunton. She was the head of the science department in Taunton. And so I was working, I was at home taking care of the boys. And then after about 6 months, I got a part-time position working as a computer academy in Fall River, which was an all-girls school teaching computers, because I had worked with computers since I was 10 years old. My father was a data processor and systems analyst with the Navy. And so I was working computers, for a long time. And so I had taught that for about a year and a half. Then a part-time position became available at Bristol Community College as director, coordinator of the environmental technology program. And then I was hired as a full-time faculty member in 1997, in January of 1997. So I've been there since then, teaching about water and wastewater. And I have my title is out of sight, but no longer out of mind, because one of the things that we think about is people don't generally think about where their water comes from or where their water goes after you flush the toilet. It doesn't just magically disappear. It goes places, and people are working on that. And so when we go into the looking at water, it's been said that water infrastructure is the lifeblood of our economy, because for one thing, we cannot survive as an economy without clean water. And we also need it. And if we're looking at developing the blue economy, we have to maintain the quality of the water that our blue economy is in, which is part of wastewater treatment. And so when we're looking at the water system, one of the things is we have part of public health, because one of the greatest success stories in public health was when we gained the ability to purify water and make it safe to drink by disinfecting it to remove pathogens. Now, that same water is also, the same water system is used for fire protection. Industry needs clean water. Industry isn't going to go into an area without clean water. Agriculture uses a big portion of our water. And also, generally, the quality of life that we want is brought about by water treatment plant operators who are out there. If we think about it, they're out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So if anybody's brushed their teeth, washed their hair, took a shower, you've benefited from the services of an environmental technician. And so when we look at this, some of the statistics we usually hear about, there's like 1.2 million miles of water supply pipes underneath us. And, we can see the pipes, sometimes you see them being put in. There's 155,000 public water systems in the United States. And a public water system is any water system that supplies either 15 service ties into it or delivers water to 25 people for 60 days or more in the year. That's a public water system. So there's over 155,000 of those in the United States. There's about 700 to 800,000 miles of public sewer pipelines underneath us. So there's roughly about 2 million miles of pipeline underneath us. And there's 14,780 public wastewater treatment facilities in the country, not to mention that there's also private facilities with companies that are doing that. So, and a lot of these pipelines are over 100 years old, some of them as much as 200 years old. And so every mile of water pipeline suffers a break every 6 years. So when we think about all the water that we produce, 1 out of 7 gallons right now of our drinking water is lost to leaks in the system. And there's a big effort now to contain those leaks because we're spending a lot of money treating this water, and then it's just going into the ground. Some of the leaks are spectacular. You see these big gushes of water coming out, but also a lot of the leaks are small and they're underground. And there's actually systems that are out there that you can listen for leaks. And you can put it down so you can pinpoint where the leaks are. And so one of the things when we're looking, and you people are going to be the people that are going to be voting in the near future, if you're not voting right now, we're going to have to spend over $1 trillion in the next 25 years just to maintain the systems that we have. Our grandparents put these things in and paid for them, but now there's coming time where these things have to be replaced, because just think if you didn't do anything to your house for 100 years, it wouldn't be in very good shape. So, a lot of these pipelines have to be replaced. Now, some of the statistics we don't hear about is that there's currently about 117,000 water and wastewater treatment plant operators working in the country. And there's expected to be about a 6% or 7,000 job growth in the next 10 years. This was relatively soon. Some of the most recent thing that I was just looking at, they're actually saying that there's going to be a drop in jobs because of automation in the system. But that's deceiving, because in the next few years, and it's what's going on right now, is we have to replace 33,000 workers now and in the coming years due to retirements. So there's going to be a lot of positions available, and 25 to 50% of the wastewater workers will be retiring in the next 5 years. And so when we look at this, our region, the Northeast, is going to actually be hit harder than other regions because of the water quality workforce is older. We've had some of the first water treatment and wastewater treatment plants in the areas. And so the average age is over 50 in the United States, in the Northeast. And also there's an average experience of people retiring is about 24 years of experience. So there's also going to be a great loss of knowledge. And so what we will need to do is there's going to be a critical need to expand and update our wastewater and environmental programs. at the community college level. Because one thing that happened was there was a lot of these programs that went to the wayside when there was, on the federal end, there wasn't much of a push for environmental kind of environmental careers. But it's coming back now, and people are looking to hire people in the water and wastewater industry. And so in 2014, the Advanced Technology, Environmental, and Energy Center in Davenport, Iowa, they received money from the National Science Foundation to conduct a series of water conversations around the country. And so the one in the Northeast, we hosted it at Bristol Community College. So we had people from all over New England come to discuss what was the status. We hosted it with the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission. And so what the status of that from these experts was that the industry leaders confirmed that there's a critical need for a pipeline of operators. And the need is likely to increase in the next 5 to 10 years. And, you know, when we're talking about operators, you're coming out, you know, say coming from programs at the community college, and you're probably starting in the range of, I'd say, depending on what qualifications you have, 18 to 20 some dollars an hour to start, plus overtime, which is time and a half. You know, so, you know, you can make a very good wage as a water and wastewater operators. Also, they determined that the demand for clean water is going to continue to grow in coming years. So we're going to need more water. One of the things is, I don't know if people are aware, but in Dighton, we actually have a desalination plant, which takes water from the Taunton River and puts it through nanofiltration and reverse osmosis, and it creates water for Brockton, the city of Brockton. And in Swansea, they have a desalination plant which takes water from the Palmer River and provides about 1 million gallons a day to the Swansea residents, because the wells aren't able to keep up with what they need. And so one of the things that they came with, that new training programs would be needed, and program curricula would be needed to be aligned with business and industry using performance-based functions. So, and it also needs for infrastructure. When people talk about infrastructure, what they're talking about is with water, they're talking about pipelines, treatment plants, looking at equipment and things. And another thing that is of concern is aquifer drawdown. An aquifer drawdown means that you're pumping water out of an aquifer. An aquifer is a geological formation that's in the ground that can hold water, but also transmit water, so water can flow through it. And so what happens is when you stop pumping, the level in near the well drops. But when you stop pumping, it should go back to normal, to net level it was before. But what we're finding is that we're pumping so much water out, it's not coming back to the levels where they were. So that's what they're talking about with aquifer drawdown. And also they came up and saying we needed funding. And so one of the things, as I said, I've been providing training here at wastewater at Bristol Community College for over 20 years. And in 2014, we established the concept of the Blue Center for Water Technologies. And I had a Bristol Community College presidential fellowship where I came up with this idea to create it. And this is the logo for our Blue Center for Water Technologies. And so the mission of our Blue Center is preserve our water resources through education and community collaboration. And so during this fellowship, I also worked on developing a training program to address the needs that industry had. And so our project was called the New England Water Treatment Training, or NEWT. And we submitted our proposal in October of 2015, and in the spring of 2016, we were awarded a $602,000 grant. This was the logo that I put together for the grant. And some of the major goals of our our grant was to create an advisory board made up of representatives from industry, academia, and regulatory agencies from all over New England. And we have that board. We also conducted early on an industry-based, what's called a DACUM, which is developing a curriculum. So this was based on, we brought in people from all over New England to come up with what's the job of a water operator and a wastewater operator. What do they need to know? What equipment do they need to learn how to work? And also what math, because math is an important thing that's required. And so what math skills do they need to know? And so we developed, part of this was develop hybrid courses, which are online and face-to-face. And so we developed these courses in drinking water and wastewater programs. And we created 2 certificates, one for wastewater, which is now we're trying to move away from the term wastewater and turn it into clean water technology, since this water is being recycled in a lot of places and it's not waste. And then also we have a drinking water certificate program. And so we're trying to bring in, we meet with our career centers and our veteran centers to bring in more people that are underrepresented students into this water and wastewater careers. And so we also created a mechanism to get college credit if you already had state certifications in water and wastewater, because what you do is after you take your training, you have to take a state exam in order to get a license to work in the treatment area. So our programs train you to work in there. So we put in place a way that you could get college credit for courses that are needed in preparation of taking the state certification exam if you've already passed that certification exam. We also enhanced the laboratory capability. So this was the development of the Blue Center for Water Technologies. And we created a lending lab also, so that schools, so if you're out there, tell your teachers at times, I know hopefully you are going to get back to a little bit more normal, but I know the Global Charter School has actually borrowed some of our equipment as part of this program. So, that we have equipment that's available for people to borrow when we're not using it. And so what we created was a model hands-on drinking and wastewater training operation. This is the classroom area. Then these you can look at another time, but this is all the possible things that we can do training on. And then I have I built from scratch a water treatment plant. So this does exactly what a water treatment plant would do, all the steps in a conventional water treatment plant. We also have an aquaculture system, and these are two, as you can see right there, these are 2 400-gallon tanks. I have goldfish in them right now. And what they're doing is, this is a wastewater treatment plant right here. So they're supplying waste, and so that the people can learn how to do it. Then we have different types of pumps equipment, testing equipment, and also flow meter equipment. And this is, again, more pictures of the testing equipment. We're donated a 275-gallon coral reef ecosystem, which is kind of the thing that you can see from the center from the outside. And then we also developing internships. This is one of our students here, Mike Poitras, who is now, he's been to other parts of the country working, but now he's back here in Fall River, and he's actually going to be working with us on the grant. He came with us to Washington to do make some presentations, because we take students down to Washington annually with the career. We also wanted to implement these programs in other community colleges throughout New England. And so we actually have the Northern Maine Community College has duplicated some of our stuff, and we have other schools that are looking at some of our curriculum. And we also conduct outreach to high schools. I bring high schools in to do programs at the college. We talk with employment agencies and recruitment strategies so we can encourage minorities, women, veterans and other non-traditional students into the water industry. And the idea is to create a pool of qualified drinking water and wastewater operators so we can meet the growing need in the New England region. These two girls here were actually from Brazil, and they came for our water program through a State Department thing. She's from Rio here, Marina, and she's from, this was a few years ago, she's from Sao Paulo in Brazil. And this is, again, another picture of Mike. And so, that's my presentation. If we have time, if you have questions about the careers in the water industry, because it's a big